In July of 2023, a ghost story finally came to an end. After 13 years of silence, SWAT teams swarmed a quiet, dilapidated house in Massapequa Park and dragged out the man accused of being the Gilgo Beach killer. The authorities called it a masterpiece of modern investigation. They stood at podiums, surrounded by cameras, and told the world that they used advanced DNA tracking and cell tower triangulation to finally hunt him down. They patted each other on the back. They called it justice. But that is a lie. The truth is much darker, and it's something the police don't want you to focus on. They didn't catch Rex Heuermann because of a new scientific breakthrough in 2023. They caught him because a rookie investigator finally decided to do the one thing his predecessors refused to do. He ran a simple database search for a Chevrolet Avalanche. It took the computer less than 45 minutes to spit out the killer's name. But here is the problem. They didn't get that description in 2023. They had it in 2010. The evidence that could have stopped a serial killer was sitting in a file cabinet for a decade, gathering dust while the families waited, while the killer walked free, and while the public lived in fear. This isn't a story about how police caught a monster. It's a story about why they let him walk. Welcome to the Hidden Complex. Here we don't just look at the killer, we look at the system that allowed him to exist. We dig into the psychology of the offender, but also the psychology of the silence that protected him. Today we are going to uncover the timeline of negligence that let the Gilgo Beach killer hide in plain sight. To understand the magnitude of this failure, we have to go back to September 2010. Before the bodies were found on Gilgo Beach, before the media panic set in, Amber Costello was living in West Babylon. She was 27 years old. The media often paints victims like Amber with a broad brush: sex worker, addict, transient. But at the Hidden Complex we look closer. Amber was a human being. She was originally from Clearwater, Florida. She had been through rehab. She was trying to fight her demons, trying to find a way back to a stable life. But relapse is a brutal part of the cycle, and to fund her addiction and support her roommates, she turned to sex work. She wasn't invisible. She had people who cared about her, including a roommate named Dave Schaller. And Dave isn't just a footnote in this story. He is the man who solved the case 13 years too early. Dave told the Suffolk County Police about a client who had come to see Amber. A man who was terrifying. This wasn't a standard encounter. Dave described him as an ogre. He said the man was massive, 6'4", over 200 pounds, with a heavy build, dark hair and glasses. He looked like a monster in a cheap suit. He had dead eyes. He had an aura of violence that made the hair on the back of Dave's neck stand up. But Dave gave them something even better than a description of the man. He described the machine. On the night Amber disappeared, that ogre pulled up in a very specific vehicle. A dark green, first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. Now, if you know cars, you know this wasn't a generic sedan like a Toyota Camry or a Honda Civic. The Chevy Avalanche is a distinct, polarizing truck with those angled sail panels on the back. And in 2010, on Long Island, a dark green one was rare enough to be a solid lead. It was a fingerprint on wheels. Dave Schaller gave this information to the police immediately. He was adamant. He told them, look for the ogre. Look for the green Avalanche. So, what did the police do with this smoking gun? They filed it. Because Amber was a sex worker, because she struggled with addiction, in the eyes of the department in 2010, she was a low-priority victim. The tip about the truck was buried in a box, and the ogre drove back to his office in Manhattan. While that file sat in the dark, let's look at who we lost. The Gilgo Four were not just names on a docket. There was Maureen Brainerd Barnes, a 25-year-old mother from Connecticut. She wasn't on the streets because she wanted to be. She was there because she was about to lose her home. She was trying to make enough money to pay her bills so she wouldn't lose custody of her children. She went to New York for a few days, hoping to come back with stability. She never came back. There was Melissa Barthelemy, a 24-year-old beauty school graduate from the Bronx. She dreamed of opening her own salon. There was Megan Waterman, just 22, a young mother from Maine. These women vanished into thin air, and their families were left in a purgatory of not knowing. But the killer didn't just kill them. He tormented the living. And this is where the psychological profile of Rex Heuermann begins to emerge, not just as a killer but as a sadist. After Melissa Barthelemy disappeared, her younger sister, Amanda, began receiving phone calls. They came from Melissa's phone. Imagine the hope Amanda must have felt seeing her sister's name on the caller ID. Imagine answering, expecting to hear her voice. Instead she heard a man. A calm, soft-spoken man. He didn't demand ransom. He didn't ask for money. He called to taunt her. He described in graphic detail what he had done to Melissa. He told Amanda that her sister was dead. He called again and again, infiltrating their grief with his voice. These calls pinged off cell towers in Midtown Manhattan. One of them pinged near Massapequa Park. Think about that. In 2009, the killer was using the victim's phone to call the victim's family from the very area where he lived and worked. The police knew about the calls. They tracked the towers. But the investigation was fractured. The dots were there, the location, the taunts, the sadism, but nobody connected them. And this brings us to the core of the tragedy. If incompetence was the only issue, Rex Heuermann might have been caught in 2011 or 2012. But incompetence wasn't the problem. Corruption was. You have to understand who was running the show. Meet James Burke. At the time, Burke was the chief of the Suffolk County Police Department. He wasn't just a bad boss, he was a criminal operating with a badge. His tenure as chief was described by prosecutors later as a reign of terror. He ruled by fear. Detectives who questioned him were demoted. Officers who crossed him were ruined. Almost immediately after the bodies were discovered on Gilgo Beach, Burke made a decision that baffled criminal experts around the world. He kicked the FBI off the case. The FBI offered federal resources. They offered access to the Behavioral Analysis Unit, the Mindhunters, who specialize in profiling serial killers. They offered access to massive vehicle databases, the kind that could have cross-referenced a Chevy Avalanche with registered owners in Massapequa in seconds. Burke said no. He slammed the door. He ordered his detectives to stop sharing information with federal agents. He effectively built a wall around the investigation. Why would a police chief refuse help to catch a serial killer who was terrorizing his own community? Because James Burke was hiding crimes of his own. We now know that in 2012, a man named Christopher Loeb, a heroin addict who had previously broken into cars, made the mistake of breaking into James Burke's department-issued SUV. He stole a duffel bag. Inside that bag wasn't police equipment. It wasn't tactical gear. It was pornography. It was sex toys. It was compromising material that Burke was desperate to keep hidden. When Burke found out who stole the bag, he didn't act like a law enforcement officer. He acted like a gangster. He had Loeb arrested and brought to the precinct. He ordered the officers to chain Loeb to the floor of the interrogation room. And then the chief of police entered the room and beat the handcuffed suspect himself. He punched him, choked him, and threatened to kill him if he ever spoke about what was in the bag. This is the man who was in charge of finding the Gilgo Beach killer. Do you see the tragedy here? Burke couldn't let the FBI help with the serial killer case, because if the feds started digging into his department, they wouldn't just look at the murders. They would look at the leadership. They would look at the corruption. They might find out about the beating of Christopher Loeb. They might find out about the duffel bag. To protect his own career, to protect his own dirty secrets, James Burke blinded the investigation. He sacrificed the Gilgo Beach victims on the altar of his own ego. The Chevy Avalanche tip sat in that file, untouchable, because the one agency with the power to find it, the FBI, had been locked out of the building. Detectives like Dominic Verone, experienced investigators who wanted to solve the case, were pushed out or silenced. The message was clear: don't ask questions. Don't talk to the feds. Just do what you're told. So, while the police were fighting a civil war with the FBI, what was Rex Heuermann doing? He was thriving. He wasn't hiding in a bunker. He wasn't drifting from town to town. He was an architect working in the heart of New York City. He took the train from Massapequa Park every day, just like thousands of other commuters. He wore a suit. He carried a briefcase. He had a wife. He had children who went to the local schools. He was living the perfect camouflage. This is where the psychology of the compartmentalized killer comes into play. Rex Heuermann was able to completely separate the ogre from the architect. By day he was a man obsessed with details. As an architect, his job was structure. He dealt with the intricate regulations of New York City building codes. He was known for being pedantic, annoying, maybe a little aggressive in meetings, but normal. By night, he retreated to his childhood home. And inside that home, the structure fell apart. The house was a hoarding nightmare. It was filled with clutter, guns, and darkness. This was the ogre's lair. But his digital footprint, which was later uncovered, tells us something terrifying. He wasn't ignoring the investigation. He was obsessed with it. Prosecutors later found that Heuermann searched for updates on the Gilgo Beach case over 200 times. He wasn't just curious, he was monitoring the incompetence. He searched for phrases like, "Why hasn't the Gilgo killer been caught?" and "Suffolk police investigation." He searched for podcasts about the case. He was watching the news conferences. He saw James Burke fighting with the FBI. He saw the chaos. Psychologically, this empowered him. Serial killers often stop or cool down when they feel the heat of law enforcement closing in. They get paranoid. They make mistakes. But Heuermann saw no heat. He saw a police force that was distracted and broken. He saw a system that didn't care about women like Amber Costello. He searched for photos of the victims. He searched for his own family members to see if they were being tracked. He was taunting the system from the safety of his home office, secure in the knowledge that the Ogre description was buried deep in a file nobody was reading. Think about the arrogance required to do that. To live your life, go to work, pay your taxes, knowing that your car, the very car you used to transport victims, was parked in your driveway. He didn't sell the green Avalanche. He didn't crush it. He kept it. For years it sat in his driveway in Massapequa Park. Later, he moved it to his brother's property in South Carolina, but he didn't destroy it. He kept the trophy. He bet his life on the police department's incompetence. And for 13 years he won that bet. The stalemate lasted for over a decade. The families of the victims marched. They held vigils on the beaches where their daughters were found. They cried into microphones, begging for anyone to come forward. All the while, the answer was sitting in a cardboard box a few miles away. James Burke eventually went to prison, not for the murders but for the beating of Christopher Loeb and the cover-up. He served 46 months in federal prison. But even with Burke gone, the culture of inertia remained. The case was cold. The narrative had set in. The Gilgo Beach killer was a genius who had outsmarted everyone. It wasn't until 2022 that the wall finally came down. A new police commissioner, Rodney Harrison, took over. He was an outsider. He wasn't part of the good old boys club of Suffolk County. He looked at the unsolved case file and decided it was an embarrassment. He brought in a new district attorney, Ray Tierney. Together they did the one thing James Burke refused to do. They invited the FBI back in. They created a specialized task force, the Gilgo Beach Homicide Investigation Task Force. They gave this small group of investigators a simple yet exhausting mandate: start from zero. Read every file. Assume we missed something. Imagine being the investigator who opened that dusty box from 2010. Imagine pulling out the interview notes from Dave Schaller. You read the date, September 2010. You read the description, green Chevy Avalanche. Ogre. It must have felt like a punch to the gut. The answer had been there the whole time. They didn't need a psychic. They didn't need a miracle. They needed a database search. They ran the query. First-generation Chevy Avalanche. Registered to a white male. Massapequa Park area. Do you know how many names came up? Out of all the people on Long Island, one name rose to the top. Rex Heuermann. It took them 6 weeks to do what the old administration couldn't do in 12 years. 6 weeks. From that moment, the clock started ticking for Rex Heuermann. But this time, the police were the ones in the shadows. They began a massive surveillance operation. They watched him commute. They watched him walk the streets of Manhattan. They needed DNA. They needed to link the man in the avalanche to the bodies on the beach. Heuermann was careful, but he couldn't stop being human. In January 2023, surveillance teams watched him toss a pizza box into a public trash can on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. As soon as he walked away, detectives swooped in. They grabbed the crust. The lab tested the DNA from the crust. They compared it to a single male hair that had been found on the burlap sack used to wrap one of the victims. A hair that had been preserved for over a decade. Was a match. In July 2023, the ghost story ended. Tactical teams moved in. The Ogre was dragged out in handcuffs, looking older, softer, but still wearing that mask of confusion. The green Avalanche was seized from South Carolina. The House of Horrors was dismantled piece by piece. As the news broke, the media celebrated. It was a victory lap for law enforcement. But those who knew the details felt a different emotion: rage. They realized that the technology hadn't solved the case. The old file had. The DNA simply confirmed what Dave Schaller had told them in 2010. We need to remember that for 13 years, a man walked free because a police chief was more worried about his reputation than solving a murder. We need to remember that a witness gave them the answer, and they ignored him because the victim was a sex worker. The system didn't work. The system failed. The evidence didn't change between 2010 and 2023. The truck was the same. The description was the same. The only thing that changed was that the people in charge finally decided to look. This case forces us to ask a hard question. How many other cases are sitting in cold storage right now, solved in a file cabinet, waiting for someone to care enough to open the drawer? That is why we started the Hidden Complex. We are here to shine a light not just on the killers, but on the broken systems that enable them. We explore the psychology of the crime and the psychology of the cover-up. We refuse to accept the official narrative without questioning the why. If you believe that the system needs to be held accountable, and you want to see more investigations into the truth behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are building a community that demands better. We are just getting started, and there are so many more files to open. Justice was delayed. But thanks to the persistence of a few good people who finally opened the file, it was not denied. I'll see you in the next case.